Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Alright, where... Nothing has landed for me to pick up. What's going on? Oh, there we go. Now we got one. But roll. Well, that was short-lived. I win. see what kind of upgrades we can get. I think what we'll do here is switch this over. Sources, browser, so we can see it. Here. And we're going to pull up something to listen to.
Well, the thing I want to talk about AI later, but what I want to start off with is John 1:1 about the Word, where in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And we live in this word-based universe. I want to obviously talk about words, talk about writing, but I think that's a good jumping off point of why is that such a profound idea?
The idea that this is a word-based universe has been profoundly important in my own life because of the pressure of naturalism or materialism, trying to argue the exact opposite. Because words that carry meaning are a very high-level thing in human experience. And the very fact that in two main areas we find that word base, I think poses a fatal threat to the materialistic interpretation of the universe. The first is in mathematics, which is my field, that we can, in the language of mathematics, and it is a language, it's the most precise language we've got in a way, we can encapsulate some of the ways in which the universe behaves, notably going back to Kepler and Newton and Clerk-Maxwell and so on. And it's proved to be a brilliant tool for understanding part of the way in which the universe is and works. And then secondly, research in biology has brought us to the longest word of any kind that we've ever discovered, which is the human genome, the genetic code, 3.4 billion letters long. They're chemical letters, of course, but they function precisely as a word with meaning because they code for various proteins and all the rest of it. So there are those two major disciplines, physics, chemistry. We got mathematics underpinning them. And in biology, we've got this fundamental word. And it is the fact that in all our human experience, words come from minds. You only have to see the word EXIT above a door. It's only 4 letters. But if you ask for the origin of that, people will explain it in terms of, well, this sign had to be made and may have been made by automated machinery. But somewhere there's a mind that has chosen to put a word that means exit up there. So if we will attribute mind to words of 4 letters long, It's rather curious when we come to a word of 3.4 billion letters long that we say it happens by chance and necessity. That, to my mind, is nonsense. And I prefer an explanation that makes sense to one that doesn't make any sense.
Right. And as you've gone about reading scripture, spending time in the poetry of the Psalms, the literature of the Old Testament, how do you feel like that has rubbed off on your own
There
life?
we go.
That's very hard to measure. We're influenced by many things in our own writing. But what I probably need to explain is I had a genius of a mentor.
Yeah.
I'm publicly trained in the sciences, but privately trained in the humanities. And my mentor for 50 years was the late Professor David Gooding, who was a classicist, but he was a world authority in the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament. And he it was who showed me how biblical literature worked, and how it worked actually in common with some of the classical writings. And that fascinated me. I mean, I've always been interested in grammar. I was very keen on Latin at school. And I've always been keen in languages of any kind, starting with mathematics and modern languages. But the way in which ideas are communicated in literature, getting some of the clues of the methodology that the ancient writers used was hugely important, and then seeing it in scripture. So I actually did many studies with him, including the ideas and thoughts that for many years that led to my most recent book on Revelation. So a lot of it rubbed off. It must have rubbed off.
What did he see about ancient literature? And you were talking about the ways that it was almost in conversation with other literature. What did he see that you were missing?
Well, what I had not come across before was probably two things. One was structure, and the other is thought flow.
Structured.
In other
thought flow.
words, if we take any book, like the book I've just written, it's split
nice,
into
great.
chapters. And that's to help people to know when they can stop and go to sleep. And usually those chapters are arranged around some kind of scheme. They might be geographical, they might be the way in which history moves, or they might be any kind of thing that gives you a coherent joining together of ideas. Now, we do it the simple way to help people who are simple-minded. We label our chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. But in the ancient world, they didn't do that. They were more sophisticated and therefore much more interesting in that they divided their writing up, often by using a repeated phrase. And the classic example in the New Testament is in the Gospel of Matthew, where Matthew, at intervals, uses a phrase that is a variation on the following theme. And it came to pass when Jesus had finished these sayings, he went into the villages of Galilee. And it came to pass when Jesus had finished this teaching, he came down the mountain, that kind of thing. And it's repeated 4 or 5 times. And what he taught me was when you see something like that, you should seize on it, because it's highly likely that that is a major division marker. There will be minor ones. But then the way to approach something like Matthew's Gospel is take 2 of those markers and look at the material in between and look in it for 2 things initially. One is the repetition of ideas, because if this is a section, you might expect so that one section, Matthew, for example, keeps repeating the concept of authority and illustrates it from different perspectives. So that proved to be something really important. So within the section, you then look for the thought flow. So you don't simply ask, what does this parable mean? You ask a prior question, what does it say? And he contended, quite rightly, I believe, that most of the failure to understand what Scripture means is not taking enough time to see what it says.
Right.
So you take time to see what it says, and then you can ask the meaning question. And that will involve asking, why is this bit of Scripture or that parable or that incident there and not there? Why is it in the place it is?
Right.
What part of a cumulative argument, if there is one, is that contributing? Now, the moment I saw that, I was hooked. I was 18 years old in Cambridge. He invited me to do a Bible study. And that one evening, being shown that, completely blew away all my preconceptions, really, I think. And I got going.
Yeah, it's funny, something very similar. I feel like I'm in the process of having that revelation that you had many years ago. And there's a few things that have really struck me. So the way that we talk about it is observation, interpretation, application of so often when people read the scriptures, they jump to what should I do?
Oh, sure.
And so often it's just what words are repeated? Why is this book being written? And it's funny, the reading of scripture for me has been very elementary in terms of the methodology, but very intense in terms of the depth and intensity with which we've done it. And it gets me to ask, and I guess I'm going to play kind of a devil's advocate here, even though I'm a believer, but how do we know that something is God-breathed when it's written, right? I think of 2 Timothy 3:16. All scripture is God-breathed and useful for teaching, rebuking, training, and correcting in righteousness. But how do we know that? Can we actually examine the text and know that it's God-breathed, or is there another way that we can validate that?